Selected parts from the book My Life Story, written by Sri KJS Dhillon. Part 15. The Kashmir situation has been so much in the news that it is often a subject of animated discussion among people. During one such discussion with a fellow traveler on a journey I was undertaking just after the commencement of the Kargil war, he asked me, Sir, what will be the impact of this Kargil war and situation in Kashmir on the prices and availability of mustard oil in the country? Taken aback, I asked him, why are you concerned about mustard oil of all things? He replied that he had a small business wherein he was dealing in mustard oil and was naturally worried about the effect of the war on the product that was the mainstay of his livelihood. His microcosmic interest in just the aspect of the economy that had direct implications for the future of his business indicate the huge disconnect between the actions of the government and the defense forces on one hand and perceptions among the common people on the other hand. This gentleman's simple statement also got me thinking about the huge repercussions of any conflict situation or war. Basically, it is nations that go to war, and this war is not only fought by the defense forces of the countries concerned, but the general public also contributes directly or indirectly, and usually with little awareness about it, to the war effort, which means a comprehensive national power is applied to win wars. Wars are thus the outcomes of a combination of military might, academic matters, diplomatic efforts, and domestic issues, and therefore entail the contribution of each and every citizen. Also, the best way to prevent a war is to be fully prepared for it because such extensive preparation by a nation will deter any enemy from initiating a war against it. The seemingly trivial conversation was thus actually a vital eye opener for me as it made me realize the imperative to create awareness about the circumstances that led to war between countries and the ways in which war can be averted. The prevalence of numerous media and instant communication channels in today's globalized world easily facilitates the spread of such awareness. But most of these means of communication were conspicuously by their absence prior to the 2000s. I must humbly admit that in 1999, the nation went all out support the war effort during the Kargil war. I was, for instance, a personal witness to the huge number of color televisions, blankets, clothing items, and numerous other products lying at the Srinagar transit camp donated by concerned citizens for the forces. There were also innumerable bundles of non perishable food items like biscuits, noodles, dry fruits, and cans of edible oil, including mustard oil and ghee, among other things. Teams had to be specially constituted to distribute these supplies equitably to various units across Kashmir and Ladakh during the war. This Nazrana that is, site of supplies donated by obsidians for the forces nurtured in me feelings of both pride and gratitude for the invaluable support extended by the people of country to the war effort. One of the incidents I recount here concerns a Fithian attack on my post in Kashmir and the various tactics we utilized to thwart such incidents. In this context, it is important to explain the concept of stand to, a practice that was conventionally followed during the two world wars and also the initial Indo Pak wars, in which the attacks were usually planned during first light, that is, dawn, or last night, that is, dusk, depending on the particular objective of the attacking forces. Thus, during these periods, armies used to carry out a drill called Stand To, wherein every soldier would get into a trench from which he would be expected to defend his post against any enemy assault. A commander would come to check his preparedness for the ensuing battle and question him regarding the arcs of fire, that is, the area in front he was responsible for guarding. Stand 2 was regularly practiced during my tenure in RR at Manipur, wherein each soldier had to rush to his designated bunker in the least possible time. When we went to Lolab in Kashmir, I reached my company post quite late in the evening. And the first thing I did, even before having a cup of tea or taking a break, was to order the stand to drill. We began the drill by about 9 p.m. and could finish it by only about a quarter to 11 or so. Because it was a new area and dark, as a result of which it took us time to make all the adjustments and figure out the exact locations that each soldier was supposed to move to. Incidentally, the moment the troops got back to the respective barracks, after everyone was duly informed of his area and his bunker, just at 11 p.m., the post was fired upon. Since we had just practiced the stand to drill, every Jawan at the post knew where he had to go, and every soldier was in position within the next 30 to 45 seconds. Subsequently, the Fijians who were targeting to breach the post could not succeed. This incident, therefore, emphasizes the importance of carrying out army drills diligently and seriously. One thus cannot afford to be negligent or lax at any time, especially as an officer commanding a team or small team in such areas. Based on my experience and training, my word of advice for the young officers or youngsters wishing to join the forces is never take the easier wrong, always take the harder right. And these lines are direct excerpts from the NDA prayer, which every cadet had to recite every morning during the 3 years of training at the NDA. Even today, after all these years, reciting this prayer has become second nature for me. It was actually this very adage that saved lives on that fateful day. Here, I want to cite another incident also related to the second to drill, which occurred again in Lolab Valley. In this case, I was the officiating commanding officer of the Rashtriya Rifles Battalion, and a new young officer had just been posted at a particular post called Devar in South Lolab, which was notorious for its concentration of terrorists. As the officiating commanding officer, I wanted to visit the officer who had just come in from a peace station and discuss critical aspects of his area of responsibility with him, while also checking if things were fine and he was ready for the potential tasks that lay ahead. When I went there, the commanding officer's protection party, called the Quick Reaction Team of 20 odd boys, was with me. Akin to the incident narrated above, even before having a cup of tea or taking any kind of break, I told the post commander, let us do a stand to, asking him to specify the exact locations of the bunkers for members of my quick reaction team if something untoward were to happen in the middle of the night. The JCOs in the post told me that the involvement of the commander's QRT in the stand to drill was not required, as the troops at the post were adequate to deal with any situation. They entreated me to relax and allow them to exhibit their hospitality to a guest. But I was not very enthused by their respectful gestures and told them there are no guests in the combat zone and everyone has to be a part of the team. So, on my insistence, they agreed and we carried out the stand to drill, which helped identify the specific positions for each member of my QRT, allowing them to settle in at the post comfortably and yet be fully prepared for the eventuality. And sure enough, at about 11:30 p.m., the post came under terrorist fire. When the firing started, each member of my team went to his respective designated location. Incidentally, I was wearing salwar kameez as my night dress, and without stopping to think about the implications of my dress, I picked up a weapon and started running towards the bunker that had been earmarked for me during the stand to practice. Suddenly, when I was going past the cookhouse, that is a kitchen, I heard the sound of someone cocking a rifle. As I heard the noise of the rifle cocking, it immediately occurred to me that since I was wearing a Patani suit, could I be mistaken for the Ferian? So I returned to my cabin post haste and to avoid wasting time, pulled on the combat dress, that is, trousers and jacket, on top of the Patani suit itself. Anyway, the fire was suppressed after about 30 to 40 minutes and everything seemed to be all right. The troops did well to counter the terrorists' fire, and as per the initial report, no civilian was allowed to enter the post. Notwithstanding the initial inputs by everyone, our biggest concern was to find out if anyone had entered the post or not. So, when the all correct or all okay report was being taken, I heard some commotion outside the kitchen. On checking, I was told by the JCO that the cook was adamant that a Fithian had entered the post. The cook said, I saw him personally and was loading my weapon to fire at him, but the Fithian ran back towards the company commander's hut. The cook also described in no unclear terms the Fithian he had seen. वो पठानी सूट में 6.5 फुट का दाढ़ी वाला बंदा है था। वो तो मेरी राइफल सही टाइम पर फायर नहीं की, वरना मैंने उसे 1 मिनट में मार दिया होता। He was a 6.5 feet tall, bearded person dressed in a Patani suit. Unfortunately, my rifle did not work, otherwise, I would have eliminated him in minutes. Obviously, he had mistaken me to be a terrorist when I went past the kitchen in my Patani dress. So, without a word, I took off my jacket, exposing the Patani suit underneath, and asked the cook expressionlessly, is this the purported Fithian? At first, he was nonplussed. Then, realizing the truth, he exclaimed, laughing, so you are our Fithian. I nodded in agreement, saying, thank God your rifle did not fire. This incident reiterates how seriously we need to take all our drills and practices and implement everything we have learned during our training. Also, alertness and presence of mind are critical in any situation. In my effort to save time, I probably did not anticipate the consequences of rushing out in my unconventional dress. On a lighter note, I would like to recount what my RR sector commander, who later on rose to become the vice chief of the army staff, said to me one day. Tiny, you attract fire wherever you go. Fortunately or unfortunately, this happened to be true as it continued to happen with me throughout my life. There were many incidents when I was directly in the line of fire from terrorists or insurgents, and I could have easily lost my life each time, though, like a cat with 9 lives, and definitely more than that in my case, I am still around. Seeing destiny repeatedly take me to Kashmir, I cannot help but feel that I must have shared a close bond with this place in my last life too, which has carried on throughout this life. Kashmir has become an inseparable part of my DNA. In fact, I was approved for the rank of brigadier and was in the US on official duty when I was received the news of my posting as the commander of a brigade in North Kashmir. I called up my father and told him that I had been posted to Kashmir and would be going there on promotion as a brigadier. His instant reaction was, वहाँ पर तेरे नानके है, बार बार जाता है. Do you have your ancestral maternal home in Kashmir that keeps drawing you there? Why do you keep going back there every so often? His statement is not without valid justification, as a large part of my professional life has been spent in Kashmir, and I can vouch for the fact that I know more about Kashmir than my own village back home in Punjab. I may not know my neighbors or their families in my village, but I practically know each and every village in Kashmir. In fact, the local Kashmiris who know me intimately actually tell me, you are an honorary Kashmiri. Unlike officers of the Indian police force who belong to the cadre of a particular state, army officers do not have any such cadres, but all the police officers in Kashmir jokingly tell me, आप तो आर्मी में कश्मीर कैडर का हो. You are a Kashmir cadre officer in the army. I have served with these officers for several years. For instance, I have known most of the senior police officers since they were newly commissioned SPs and I was a captain or a major. We have literally grown up together. I have also had the occasion to meet and befriend the very who is who among the politicians, journalists, and other opinion makers because we have been meeting each other numerous times during the course of both work and personal interactions. And all of them invariably know me as an officer for and of Kashmir. As RR Sector Commander, I was responsible for carrying out counter-terrorism operations in Rajwar and Harfurda Forest, the most dense forests in North Kashmir. I suspect that most people believe that mobile or mechanized warfare through the use of tanks and other mechanized platforms whose usage entails speed and accuracy is absolutely different from the sluggish, slow moving counter-terrorism operations in the dense jungles in high mountains with near zero visibility. But I am a firm believer and proponent of the idea that the mobility of mind, speed of operations, operational acumen, visualization of the evolving situation, and competence of the commanders are needed in both. In the jungles, the speed one needs is not through the tracks or engines, but in terms of mobility of mind. And though in the jungle we may not be covering long distances of hundreds of kilometers that modern weaponry can do, but even if we are covering just 2 kilometers, mobility of mind is crucial in the stealth of the jungle. Thus, we had to change both our strategies and our mindsets while carrying out counter-terrorism operations in the forests. Here, we very successfully applied what is called the swarming technique, which is used to flush out the terrorists from the jungle. Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain परम विशिष्ट सेवा मेडल, उत्तम युद्ध सेवा मेडल, अति विशिष्ट सेवा मेडल, सेना मेडल, विशिष्ट सेना मेडल recipient and retired, was the Chinar Corps commander when I was the RR sector commander in the Rajwar forest of North Kashmir in 2010 to 12. Lieutenant General Hasnain has written on applying swarming and small team operations in Jammu and Kashmir in defense post in January 2014. With his permission, I reproduce certain excerpts from his article for an easy understanding of this technique. For years on end, we have heard about small team operations, but the Indian Army has experimented with it just a few times. Not too much is documented about success, and wherever they have been executed, it is primarily the special forces or a few parachute regiment units which have had the will to implement this most essential aspect of counterinsurgency operations. This is not to take away anything from the courageous experiments of some outstanding officers and men of the Rashtriya Rifles who adopted this concept with much spirit and elan in South Kashmir, clearing out some areas in the bargain. The fact that most contacts in the last few years have seen the elimination of only 2 to 3 terrorists confirms that the days of large bands of terrorists roaming the countryside are well behind us. The army has assessed this correctly and put an end to large scale cordon and search operations in the villages and towns. There are remote mountainous hideouts where covert approach is difficult. Jungle strongholds exist as in Rajwar and Harfurda forests where hard to discover dugouts act as hideouts. Then there are hideouts in peripheral villages around major towns such as Sopore, Anantnag or Pulwama. The army's favorite mode of domination in built up areas is the ambush, although rarely does it get a success. In the prevailing situation, foreign, that is, Pakistani terrorists like to remain in hideouts close to the LOC as it facilitates easier infiltration and later exfiltration at the end of their contractual period. The situation begs for swarming operations. These need to be understood and rehearsed if a measure of success is to be achieved. Two units of RR provided two sets of 75 teams of 6 men each. That makes almost 450 men at one time being deployed. Orders for the RR sector deploy one set for 72 hours in the jungle and then progressively turn overall 75 teams with the next set of teams, no break between operations. The men were briefed to ensure that 96 hours of self sufficiency would result in only 72 hours operation and then 72 hours refit. There was to be no search, only static deployment in small cordons taken up in the forms of ambushes with adequate command and control to ensure that swarming remained coordinated on ground to avoid fratricide. Nothing happened in the first 72 hours except the muted cursing by the RR teams as they prepared themselves for a long haul. The terrorists, having withstood the might of many regular and RR units over a couple of years, expected the conventional search and destroy mission to be called off after the first 72 hours. They appreciated that resources from the nearby villages would once again build up into their hideouts before the next operation was launched by the RR. That is, that could be any time from the seventh day to 3 months. By the fifth day, an odd intercept indicated that the terrorists were indeed getting surprised. No soldier seemed to be in a hurry to get out of the area. The 72-hour turnover by the two groups was done meticulously and seamlessly, spread out over a large jungle area. The turnover itself was contributing to the deception. On the seventh day, an element of desperation could be sensed. More SMS and voice messages reporting the paucity of food and water with no indications of the RR stepping down. It is around this time that the first of the many contacts commenced. By the 30th day, the logistics situation of the terrorist cadres was getting fairly stretched. The communication intercepts revealed plans of breaking out and conducting Fithian like attacks. All troops were then put on a higher status of alert for potential suicide type attacks. None occurred. The terrorists were simply not up to it. The two units, ably assisted by some paratroopers and Aghatak platoon of another RR battalion, comprising tribal troops, formed the operational element and had a field day as multiple contacts commenced with the terrorists deciding to break cover in sheer desperation. Many were eliminated while a few did escape the dragnet. It was a great achievement of Kilo Force under General Thorje and Brigadier Tiny Dhillon of RR Sector, proving how mindsets about tactical operations can easily be broken for effect. These swarming operations used to last for as long as 40 to 50 days at a stretch. Swarming basically signifies a tactic deployed on a given area with the objective of tiring out the adversary by saturating his combat stamina in an extended operation that could go on for long periods at a stretch. The entire team, including myself as the commander, would be involved in the operation in the jungles during this period. One saving grace in this tough challenge, however, was that we always received freshly cooked food from the multiple kitchens running out of many RR posts around the area of swarming, wherein anything up to 1200 officers and men were deployed in the jungles at any given time. Colonel Prashant Nikam, my deputy commander in charge of procuring and providing cooked food to the troops involved in the operations, was an enthusiastic officer with unique ideas to keep the morale of the troops high. He would add unique popular items in the meal packets every day, such as fruity, eclairs, chocolates, churma, and even laddus from famous outlets like Haldiram's. This effort was intended to keep both the nutritional value and morale of the troops high. On the other hand, the terrorists stuck in our dragnet were crying for food after a few days. We intercepted a message from their handlers trying to motivate them by promising that biryani was awaiting them the moment they were able to link up with the other terrorists in Rajwar forest. My message to my small teams operating in the jungle was very clear that biryani khane nahi denge. We ensured this by neutralizing any terrorists coming in to meet them with packets of biryani and not allowing them to get out of the Chakravyuh. These large scale operations were a success due to the very professional conduct by each and every soldier involved in them. Here, I remember one such soldier, Lance Naik Pati Tasuk of the Brigade of Guards, serving with the RR Battalion deployed in Rajwar during my tenure as a sector commander. Having been in active operations since my captain days of 1988 and subsequently as a major in RR in the Northeast and Lolab, and then a commanding officer in Tral in South Kashmir, I was really fortunate that until I was RR sector commander, I had never lost any of the officers or jawans under my command despite being involved in numerous encounters with insurgents and terrorists in many successful operations. However, this record was sadly broken when we lost Lance Naik Pate Tasuk in an operation in the Rajwar forest. Tasuk, who hailed from Arunachal Pradesh, was a daredevil soldier and a fearless hunter by nature. He had already been awarded a Sena medal during his tenure in the Ghatak platoon of RR battalion, which was operating in the Rajwar forest. Lance Naik Pate Tasuk got the second Gallantry Award and the Sena Medal posthumously for an operation in Rajwar. Having lost a soldier for the first time in my command, I will always remember Tasuk as the most daring soldier with a hunter's mindset. The next call of duty for the commanding officer, however, was to ensure proper documentation for the fallen soldier so that his wife and children could get access to all the benefits they were entitled to. As soldiers come to RR for a tenure of 2 years or so, the documentation of their earlier service period is generally done by their parent unit, and all the records are held in the respective regiment's records file offices. In this case, though, the commanding officer was on leave, and the adjutant told me that all of Lance Naik Pati Tasuk's service documents must be in order and we could start the process of compensation for the family. I have a very strong sense of ominous intuition or black intuition, as I call it, when something is not right. Ultimately, taking care of these things is the responsibility of the commanding officer, but as the brigade commander, I too had a responsibility, and acting on my hunch, I asked the commanding officer, who had immediately rejoined duty after cutting short his leave the moment he came to know of this incident, to recheck all Tasuk's documents prior to processing the case with the records officer. A thorough back check was carried out by his unit, and we found that he had another child but was yet to get the latter's detail published in the service book. We suspended the process of documentation until details of the second child were published. Thereafter, we called up the records office and urged them to complete the publication of details of the child's birth before initiating the process of handing out the benefits to his family. Meanwhile, we also needed a birth certificate for the second child. So I called up a brigadier colleague of mine whose relatives had been in the government of Arunachal Pradesh and requested him to facilitate the issuance of the birth certificate of Lance Naik Pate's second son on priority. The urgency of the issuance of the birth certificate was conveyed to the divisional commissioner, who issued the birth certificate within a day after checking all the records, and he faxed that birth certificate to us, and we sent it to the records office where it was duly processed, ensuring that the compensation and future benefits in education would cover his wife and both children. As an institution, we never lose contact with our brave hearts families. Tasuk's wife was given a job in the state government, and his kids, now aged 13 and 11 years respectively, are turning out to be well rounded students. Tasuk may not around today, but the army is dedicated to making his dreams for his kids come true. My first message during the first Sainik Sammelan to the unit that I was commanding was to redefine my concept of welfare during my command. For me, welfare for a soldier does not mean that he just gets good food or timely leave to visit home or a comfortable pre booked air or train journey home. It also does not mean providing him a comfortable stay in the barracks or adequate clothing and other provisions. All this was not welfare in my book. These were simply part of my duty towards my men, as they were a soldier's entitlements. As their commander, I was obliged to ensure that they got nutritious, balanced food, a comfortable and well equipped barracks to sleep in, and all the requisite equipment and clothing on time. I was also supposed to ensure efficient communication between the soldiers and their families so that rumors did not create panic. These were not, in the technical sense, the benefits of welfare. They were simply a Jawan's authorizations, and as officers, it is our duty to ensure they are provided to him. My definition of welfare instead was to make such operational plans that the unit completes its assigned task without suffering any casualty and every soldier goes back to his family hale and hearty. I, as a commanding officer, would have a long term plan for the social security of the family in case the soldier had to sacrifice his life in the line of duty. In the unit that I commanded, a Jawan, Lance Naik Umashankar, had lost his wife on the line of control before I joined the unit. The deceased soldier's father was an alcoholic and his wife had died earlier, leaving behind a minor daughter and a son. The commanding officer at that time, the late Colonel Ellen Mitra, sensing that the children may not be brought up well by the grandfather, had the family adopted by the unit and ensured that the soldier's mother, we all called her Mataji, along with her minor grandchildren, stayed with the unit and were provided quality education in the army school. The commanding officer of the unit was nominated as ex officio caretaker of the children and also the account holder for all their bank accounts. I, during my tenure as commanding officer, did my part of the duty, and now the boy has joined as a soldier in the same unit, and the daughter was married to a bank official and is happily settled in her new life. That is the long term social security I am talking of. Similarly, in the case of Lance Naik Pate Tasuk, my definition of welfare was that his family should get all their entitlements. As an aside, I must admit that because I stayed away from my family and children during most of my career, I may not have done these things for my own children as everything was being handled by my wife whenever there was a requirement for any documentation or other things in school or college. Here is an input in first person from Colonel Neil Gagan Singh, who worked with me as a company commander in the jungles of North Kashmir as a major when I was the RR sector commander as a brigadier. I quote the words of Colonel Neil Gagan Singh as narrated. I vividly remember that pleasant evening of July 2011 as I was sitting in my office at Handwar. The commanding officer called me and told me that there was confirmed input or intelligence about the presence of two foreign terrorists in a particular village in our battalion's area of responsibility. Normally, we would take all such confirmed inputs with a pinch of salt, but this tiny intelligence input was from the Jorwar, that is Tiny Dillan, and that definitely set a bell ringing because Jorwar was a man of few words himself, but his piercing eyes spoke louder than words. I gathered my men and equipment and proceeded to cordon off the house and its adjoining cowshed. The cordon stayed in place throughout the night, and with each passing moment, I became more and more convinced that this was also one of those confirmed inputs which never come true. Since my company second in command, a young officer with just about 5 or 6 years of service behind him, started looking a little tense by around midnight. I had to assuage his nerves by telling him, मैं तेरे को 2.5 साल का एक्सपीरियंस से बता रहा हूँ, इसमें कोई नहीं है. I'm telling you, based on my experience of 2.5 years, that there is no one inside this house. Little did I realize that the input about the presence of foreign terrorists had come from someone with dhai dashak, that is, 2.5 decades of experience. The next morning, the search party conducted the search as per the standard operation procedure SOP that had been laid down for such operations, and just as I suspected, nothing was found. At around 11 a.m., I lifted the cordon and sent back the reinforcements. When I called up the adjutant asking for clearance of disengagement, he told me that a search and rescue dog was on its way from a unit located over 70 kilometers away and that the cordon would continue. Full of ire at what increasingly seemed a wasted effort, I blasted the adjutant on the phone, expressing my displeasure at now having to wait there for a dog. That is when the adjutant said, Sir, ये जोरवार का हुक्म है. Sir, this is an order from Jorwar. Obviously, no further questions were asked. The terrorists were actually hiding in a hideout carved inside the false ceiling of the ground floor of the wooden floor of the first floor of the structure used as a cowshed. They were spotted by a very alert young soldier who, while escorting the dogs on the first floor of the cowshed, saw the hiding terrorists' head movement through a small crack in the wooden floor of the first floor. The young soldier must be commended for his presence of mind because when he saw the terrorist moved his head, he did not raise any alarm because doing so would have resulted in the terrorists firing through the wooden planks, which would have definitely caused harm to him and his buddy. Thereafter began a firefight and we were able to neutralize two Pakistani terrorists by evening. Finally, when Jorwar Sahab arrived and I was expecting a pat on the back for a job well done, his phone rang just then and I could hear the caller congratulating him for a successful operation. Then came the bombshell for me as I heard Tiny Sir saying, Oh, no, no, this was just a side operation. My main swarming operation is going on somewhere else. For that one moment, मेरा भगवान से विश्वास ही उठ गया था. I lost faith in God for that one moment. I was like, what a man, yaar. I put my life at stake and was nearly killed, and he's not even considering me as a main course, but just a starter. That was Tiny Sir at his operational best. However, I realized later that the insistence by Jorwar to maintain the cordon and keep an eye on the house emanated from the fact that these two terrorists had been caught in an ambush a few days ago but were able to escape by taking cover in the thick foliage of the jungle. Both these terrorists had been injured in that firefight, and so had one of our Jawans. Tiny Sir had vowed to get them within a fortnight and had tasked his sources to track all the local nursing assistants who would summoned for treatment for these injured terrorists. Hence, while he was busy in a major swarming operation in the forests of Rajwar, this small side operation fell into my lap. Thanks for listening.